Beneath the ice and silence of the Arctic, some of the deadliest predators from the Ice Age are still lying in wait. Deep in the frozen wilds of Siberia, a creature straight out of prehistoric times was found curled up in the permafrost, a baby saber-toothed cat. It was discovered in 2020 near the Ningen River, and despite being over 35,000 years old, the thing looked like it had only been dead a few days. It had thick fur, skin, claws, even its internal organs. It was all still there, and yes, the tiny sabers too. Scientists think it might have been buried in a landslide and flash frozen before decay could even start, and wasn't alone. Another cub, a few years younger, was found in the same region, preserved the same eerie way. But nobody's rushing to thaw these little killers out. The deeper they look, the more they realize just how little they know about these ancient predators. There's something about seeing a baby version of something so dangerous, though, that just hits different. Like, it's cute, but also very much not. In 2016, a gold miner working near Dawson City in Canada's Yukon territory came across something in the permafrost, a perfectly preserved Ice Age wolf pup, frozen for over 57,000 years. It wasn't a skeleton or a pile of fur and bones, it was an entire wolf, with skin, fur, tiny claws, even some of its whiskers were still intact. Genetic testing showed that it came from an ancient extinct branch, older than modern gray wolves, and adapted to a world most humans wouldn't survive 5 minutes in. They think it died inside its den. Maybe the roof collapsed, maybe the ground shifted, but either way, something sealed it in tight and froze it solid before decay had even had a chance to start. And that kind of preservation doesn't happen unless the timing is perfect, and honestly, it's a little creepy how perfect it was. The more scientists studied it, the more questions they had about its species, about how it got so well preserved, about what else might be hiding under the ice just as intact. In the Siberian permafrost, scientists found 2 cave-lion cubs so well preserved they didn't really look ancient, they looked recent. But these weren't house cats. They were baby versions of Panthera spile, aka the Eurasian cave lion. These things were massive, possibly larger than modern lions, and built for brute power. They hunted mammoths, they hunted bison, they hunted each other. One study found bones of a cave lion that had been gnawed on by another cave lion. The 2 frozen cubs, dubbed Sparta and Boris, are estimated to be around 30,000 years old, and scientists still don't know how they died exactly, but they're so well preserved, they're actually talking of cloning. The thing is, nobody's sure what kind of animal behavior you'd get out of these things if you actually defrosted them. Their instincts are 30,000 years old and hardwired for a world we don't live in anymore. So what could possibly go wrong there? In 2015, researchers in Siberia discovered a frozen woolly rhino calf that had been locked in ice for over 34,000 years. Its name is Sasha, and it's the only baby woolly rhino ever found. And it's not just bones, this thing still had skin, hair, a stubby little horn, even muscle tissue. But don't let the baby part fool you, woolly rhinos were absolute tanks. Adults could weigh over 2 tons, with horns up to 3 feet long, and you'd think for their size that they'd be slow too, but fossil evidence shows they could charge like a freight train, and they likely had tempers to match. These animals were built for war against the cold, against predators, and sometimes even against each other. Ancient cave art shows humans were just terrified of these things, often drawing them mid-charge or goring other animals, or again locked in battle with each other. If anyone's thinking of cloning a few of these things, they'd better make sure the fencing is just really strong. You can't see them with the naked eye, but Deloid rotifers are kind of freaky. These tiny aquatic creatures were found frozen in the Siberian permafrost, buried 11 feet deep and at least 24,000 years old. Scientists thawed them out and they started moving. So after 2.5 ice ages, they just woke up. They also cloned themselves. Deloid rotifers reproduce through parthenogenesis, which means they've got no need for males. They can just endlessly self-copy, and they don't just survive cold. They can endure radiation, starvation, dehydration, even the vacuum of space. Their bodies will just shut down but stay preserved, and then when conditions are right, they kind of reboot. Now, scientists are wondering how long they can actually last and how many more are still down there dormant waiting. In the icy ground of Siberia, scientists have dug up baby mammoths so perfectly preserved they still have eyelashes. One of the most famous is Yuka, found in 2007 by a reindeer herder. She's around 42,000 years old, but she still has skin, fur, internal organs. Even the milk from her mother is still inside her stomach. Another calf, Yuka, was found with strange cut marks on her bones, like something or someone had been trying to carve her up. Could have been ancient human butchering, attacks from other predators, but the truth is nobody knows exactly what happened. Every time one of these calves gets pulled from the permafrost, though, it cranks up the conversation about cloning, but even if they could bring one of these things back, should they? Once again in Siberia and Alaska, scientists have found ancient bison that are so well preserved they still had red in their veins. One of the best examples was discovered in 1979, a frozen bison they named Blue Babe because of this bluish tint from the minerals in the soil. The thing had muscle, skin, even visible wounds. It had clearly been killed by something, and then it froze before it could rot. But here's something pretty cool. These mummified bison showed signs of being stalked and eaten by predators that do not exist anymore. Deep claw marks, crushed vertebrae, and punctures that match the bite force of predators that have been extinct for a very, very long time. And scientists haven't just found one, there are multiple ancient bison mummies turning up as the permafrost melts, and each one paints a clear picture of this brutal predatory world buried under the ice. They're also keeping samples for cloning research potentially, so if you ever wanted to see a prehistoric beast brought back from the dead, they are kinda working on it. In Yukon, Canada, buried in the permafrost, scientists uncovered the frozen remains of Ice Age horses that once galloped across the tundra in massive herds. Obviously, they weren't like today's horses. They were stockier, hairier, adapted to survive in some of the harshest conditions Earth has ever seen. One foal, perfectly preserved, was found in a gold mine in 2018, still covered in reddish-brown fur. Hooves, eyelashes, even its stomach contents intact. It was over 40,000 years old, but looked more like it had just lain down for a nap. The species, Aquis lambe, went extinct thousands of years ago, but DNA from these frozen animals are so well preserved sometimes, scientists are seriously considering using it for cloning. The idea is to bring them back, and not just as a curiosity, but possibly to repopulate the tundra with them to help slow permafrost melt. Because right now it's melting faster than ever, and we're seeing more and more pieces of an ecosystem that hasn't seen sunlight in tens of thousands of years, and not everything coming out of the ice is dead. In 2014, scientists digging through 30,000-year-old permafrost in Siberia found something that was very much not extinct, a virus, a massive one. So big you could see it under a regular microscope. They called it Pithovirus sibericum, and it's part of a terrifying new category, giant viruses. Two words you just don't want to hear right beside each other. Well, this ancient giant virus actually reanimated after being frozen for tens of thousands of years, and more of these ancient viruses have been found since, buried in melting ice, all still capable of waking up and infecting hosts. The one they revived didn't target humans, just amoebas, thankfully. But that's the part that makes researchers nervous. If some ancient virus can survive that long, what else is waiting to thaw? And are we even remotely prepared for it? Because you can quarantine, a lion, you can contain a mammoth, but a virus you've never dealt with before? Good luck. In Canada's Yukon Territory, scientists came across bones and fragments of an animal that sounds made up: giant Ice Age camels. Yes, camels in the snow. Kind of a bizarre image. Not the two-humped animals we know today, obviously. They were massive and built to survive brutal cold, not scorching heat. They had long legs, thick fat stores, and bones tougher than steel. Fossils of these ancient camels were found in gold mines near Dawson City, preserved in permafrost so well, researchers were able to extract collagen from their bones, something that usually doesn't survive past a few thousand years. These camels would have roamed the same icy landscape as mammoths, direwolves, and saber-toothed cats. Some estimates say they stood over 9 feet tall, and while they might not look terrifying at first glance, just their sheer size, the power, the fact that they existed existed in this totally different version of North America, it makes them feel more like monsters than mammals. Scientists still don't completely understand how they adapted to such extreme environments or how they disappeared, but every time the ground thaws a little more bones come up, and we're starting to realize just how alien the Ice Age really was. Kamagon. On April 28th of 1974, off the coast of Littleton, New Zealand, a Japanese fishing vessel, the 28th Kamparamaru, was out doing its thing, but this day would be unlike any other. At around 7 p.m., all 28 crew members, including Captain Kimura, spotted something massive in the water. Whatever it was had a head that stuck out of the water, and even though they could only see the top of whatever this beast was, they could tell it was an absolute monster. The head alone was about 1.5 meters tall. The creature had these giant, spooky eyes on top, and some crew members thought they saw what looked like a second set of eyes, or maybe nostrils, right beneath. The texture was described as either rough and hairy or scaled with spikes. It was a bit like a gigantic spider head mixed with a sea monster. Captain Kimura even sketched the thing, and it later made headlines in the New Zealand Weekly magazine. Nearby, mysterious footprints were found on the beach. This beastie was soon linked to other cryptids in Japanese waters like the giant sea ghost, Umibazu, and the Antarctic Godzilla. More on him in a bit. But the Kamagon has to be one of the strangest sea cryptids ever reported. The colossal squid is believed to be the largest squid in terms of sheer mass. We're talking about a creature that can grow up to 39 to 46 feet long, and it's not just long, it's also built like a tank, unlike its more famous cousin, the giant squid, which are pretty incredible already. The colossal squid actually has hooks on its tentacles though, some swiveling, others three-pointed, and those hooks are sharp, designed to hold on to prey with this grip-like vice. The colossal squid's beak is the largest of any known squid, bigger than that of the giant squid, and its eyes are the biggest in the animal kingdom, with one specimen having eyes about 11 inches across. These creatures weren't found to actually exist until 1925, when 2 of its tentacles were found in a sperm whale's stomach. Sightings go way back though, but they were thought of the same way creatures like Nessie are, legends and myths. In 1802, a massive squid was spotted in Tasmania, way before anyone officially recognized the giant squid. Then in 1870, a huge squid carcass washed ashore in New Zealand, with locals calling it a tanewa. More sightings and washed up squid parts continued to pop up in the following decades. By 1924, just a year before the colossal squid was officially identified, another giant squid was spotted near Bluff, New Zealand. We know these colossal squids exist now, but we've never retrieved any massive sized carcasses, just ones on the smaller end of the scale. But somewhere deep in the waters off the coast of Antarctica, there are gargantuan squids, possibly even bigger than our current estimates. The large Antarctic sea mammal, also known as the Antarctic Godzilla. So the story goes that on February 13th of 1958, the Japanese research vessel Soya Nihongo was cruising through Antarctica's icy waters when around 7 p.m. the crew spotted something massive in Lutzow Bay. This thing was giant. The captain of the ship would go on to dub the creature the Antarctic Godzilla because to him it looked a lot like Godzilla. Now, I love my giant monster movies, Mothra, Gigan, the whole gang. Not the type of movie characters I'd like to encounter in real life though. If I found out the Ninja Turtles were chilling in the sewers below Manhattan, that would be a great day for me. A real life Godzilla rising from the water to wreak havoc on the Japanese public wouldn't be a boring news day, but not good. There's not a ton of info on this case. The sighting was brief, and the creature disappeared before anyone could get a clear look or photo, but the nickname stuck, and some say this creature could have been the same as the Kamagon that I spoke about earlier. The notorious Bloop recording. We've all heard of this, but if you're thinking it can all be explained away as glacial ice, think again, there could be more to it than that. For those not in the know, the Bloop was an eerie, unexplained sound that was recorded in 1997. Pole. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration picked up a powerful underwater noise in the South Pacific. This sound was incredibly low frequency and very loud. The mysterious sound was dubbed the Bloop, and nobody knew what it was. Some thought it might be from a massive undiscovered sea creature. But in 2012, the NOAA figured that the Bloop was actually just similar to noises made by shifting ice. The Bloop was detected several times by an array of hydrophones designed to listen for undersea activity. The NOAA concluded that the sound matched patterns produced by ice quakes rather than some giant sea creature, but till this day not everyone is convinced. Some argue that the Bloop's sound patterns are just too specific, pointing to it coming from some yet to be discovered animal. Are there walruses in the southern hemisphere? Well, not officially anyway, but there have been some very odd sightings over the years. Sightings of what have been dubbed southern walruses. Victorian naturalist James Hector, who was no stranger to odd animal reports, collected stories about walrus-like creatures spotted around New Zealand. Hector even speculated that these creatures might be lurking among the Antarctic ice floes. He thought if these areas were explored more extensively, they might uncover these walruses as well as other unknown animals. Thor Heyerdahl, the famous explorer, also had thoughts on this, saying that a Maori myth about a tusked merman might have actually been based on sightings of these mysterious southern hemisphere walruses. And there are other mentions of tusked creatures in the region. Historical records mention tusked marine mammals off South Africa. In Francois Legat's Voyage and Adventures from 1707, Legat described seeing a large red sea cow with long tusks off the Cape of Good Hope. Then in 1852, we have Hugh de Bonley's sighting off Isla San Lorenzo in Peru. He saw a giant tusked seal described as having a seal-like head with two huge white tusks. With all these strange sightings and historical records, could there really be something out there lurking in the icy depths that we still don't fully understand? But walruses aren't the only out-of-place animals reported to show up in the southern hemisphere. Narwhals have as well. Back in 1615, Dutch explorer Willem Schouten had a close encounter when his ship was attacked by an unknown beast. The next day, they found a horn lodged in the ship about a foot long. Then in 1785, a French general reported seeing two dark porpoise-like animals south of Africa. He described them having a horn about 1.5 feet long and noted a high fin, which is odd since narwhals usually have a bony ridge. In 1892, the ship Baleina spotted a narwhal near the Bransfield Strait, pretty close to Antarctica. And these were experienced whalers who all said what they saw was definitely a narwhal, or at least looked a hell of a lot like one. In recent years, Antarctica has been the focus of some pretty wild conspiracy theories, one of which is that there are secret government facilities dedicated to the study of aliens and their technology. The remote and inhospitable climate of Antarctica would make for an ideal cover for secretive activities, and some conspiracy theorists point to satellite images and unusual geological formations in Antarctica as evidence of possible hidden alien bases. Some believe that there are massive pyramid-type structures buried under the ice that may have been built by some ancient civilization, possibly with the help of aliens, or just built by aliens themselves who once inhabited the Earth, setting up bases in the South Pole. The governments of the world are rumored to have secret research facilities in Antarctica to study alien technology. Some even claim that these facilities have made contact with extraterrestrial beings. It's very hard to believe, but I'd like to think so. The Ningen is another more modern legend that's caught quite a bit of attention online in the last couple decades. Ningen, which means human in Japanese, is a creature supposedly lurking in the sub-Antarctic oceans. There are two main ways people describe the Ningen. The first is a massive whale-like creature with a humanoid face and giant limbs, said to be around 65 to 100 feet long. The second description is a lot less common, a smaller land-dwelling creature with a big head and humanoid legs. It's said to be pale blue with a big slit mouth and either small or gaping eyes. In 2007, there was a very interesting post made on the Japanese forum 2channel. According to the post, a whale research ship spotted this giant creature near their vessel off the Antarctic coast. The crew initially thought it was a submarine, but but when they got closer, it vanished under the waves. Then in 2005, some folks claimed Google Earth caught a glimpse of what they thought was a Ningen in the Southern Ocean. Skeptics argued it was just an iceberg that sort of looked like a sea monster, but then there's the 2010 Enoshima Aquarium incident. The aquarium had posted a video to YouTube with footage of the deep ocean, and towards the end, several viewers spotted what looked like this eerie thing. It almost looked like a creature with a big smiling mouth and little eyes. A lot of commenters said it looked a lot like depictions of the Ningen. The aquarium later said it was just an unusual rock formation with sponges making up what looked like eyes, but some still find the footage undeniably creepy and even think there could be more to this video than the aquarium is letting. Here's something you probably wouldn't be expecting to see on this list: ancient camels. Believe it or not, camels actually first appeared in North America more than 40 million years ago. Over time, they split into two main groups: the camels we know today and the relatives, llamas and alpacas. The camels made their way across the Bering Land Bridge, while llamas and alpacas moved south. But there was another species, the Camelops hasturnus, which stuck around in North America until the Ice Age. Some of these camels roamed as far south as Honduras, while others made it all the way to Alaska and the Yukon. In 2008, gold miners in Alaska discovered some Ice Age bones, which turned out to belong to this extinct camel species. The bones were so well preserved in the cold that researchers managed to extract DNA. Imagine a 6-foot-long beaver weighing 220 pounds. Ice Age giant beavers had 6-inch-long front teeth. They would have looked like fierce predators, but they didn't eat meat. This massive rodent was about the size of a black bear and had a tail that resembled a muskrat's rather than today's typical beaver tail. A 2019 study looked at fossils from the Yukon and Ohio dating back 10,000 to 50,000 years and revealed that the giant beaver's diet consisted mostly of aquatic plants. Tessa Plint, a researcher with Heriot-Watt University, explained that by studying the chemical makeup of fossilized bones and teeth, scientists can figure out what an animal ate even tens of thousands of years later. Understanding the diet of these ancient animals helps them learn more about how climate change affected them. As the earth warmed and dried, the giant beaver couldn't compete with smaller, more adaptable beavers that survived. In 2010, a team of Russian scientists found a well-preserved mammoth in Siberia, later named Yuka. She was a young mammoth, about 6 to 8 years old, and she lived around 39,000 years ago. Yuka's body was in really good shape. Its body measured about 2.5 meters long, and it was remarkably intact, with her trunk, bones, some of her flesh, hair, and eyes still preserved, making her one of the most well-preserved mammoth specimens ever found. Pretty incredible to see. I haven't seen it in person, but based on pictures and video that I've seen of it, it's crazy how well preserved it is. They think she might have fallen into a mud pit or drowned, which helped preserve her so well. People probably butchered her for meat, too, as there were cut marks on her bones. In 2002, an amazing discovery was made in northern Siberia. The remains of a woolly mammoth were found frozen in the permafrost near the Siberian village of Yuka. The specimen, which was an adult male, turned out to be in remarkable condition. This mammoth's head, still covered in skin, was so well preserved that it looked almost fresh. When polar explorer Bernard Bouygues heard about the find, he led a team to retrieve the mammoth's remains. The team made 3 trips to the site, carefully gathering pieces of the mammoth's body and putting them together. Gave scientists a ton of information about woolly mammoths. For example, they discovered that the mammoth had temporal glands between its eyes and ears. These glands would have helped regulate body temperature. The mammoth's feet were also a key find. The soles had deep cracks in it, which would have helped the animal grip icy surfaces while walking. A specimen also included the tusks, front legs, and even parts of the stomach and intestines. Based on the size of its bones and tusks, scientists estimated that this mammoth was over 9 feet tall at the shoulder and weighed around 4 to 5 tons. Scimitar cats, or homotheriums, were fierce prehistoric predators. Their fossils are rare. Because of this, scientists used to think that they were part of a small population. That changed in 2011 when a bone was found in permafrost at a mining site near Dawson City in Canada. This bone belonged to a scimitar cat, not a saber-toothed cat, which are often confused with scimitar cats. Scimitar cats had shorter, curved teeth that were serrated, unlike the long, flat teeth of saber-tooths. What made this find even more exciting was how well preserved the bone was in the ice. Researchers at the University of Copenhagen were able to sequence the entire genome from this bone. Their genetic makeup hints towards a scimitar-toothed cats, as being highly skilled hunters, said Michael Westbury, an evolutionary genomicist at the University of Copenhagen, going on to say they, quote, likely had very good daytime vision and displayed complex social behaviors, end quote. These cats also had adaptations for endurance. Their bones and cardiovascular systems were strong. They were built for long-distance running, and based on this, researchers believe scimitar cats hunted in packs, wearing down their prey during the day. Scientists estimated the specimen was over 47,500 years old. Scimitar cats likely went extinct around 10,000 years ago, along with many of the animals that they hunted, like mammoths and woolly rhinos. Most people think of hyenas as the scavengers of Africa, but the ancient Arctic also had its share of these creatures as well. These ancient hyenas lived over 5 million years ago, and its remains have been found around the world, from Mongolia to Kansas to Mexico. In 2019, evolutionary biologist Jack Sang analyzed a pair of fossilized hyena teeth from the Yukon. He quickly identified them as belonging to a species that once roamed the ancient Arctic. These teeth likely belonged to a hyena that lived around 850,000 to 1.4 million years ago. This hyena was equipped with teeth perfect for crushing bones, probably feeding on ancient caribou, bison, and maybe even baby mammoths. Eventually, these hyenas disappeared, and researchers think they were outcompeted by other Ice Age predators like the short-faced bear or bone-crushing dog. Never heard of those before till today. What an awesome name. In 2018, miners working at Hester Creek in the Yukon discovered a mummified squirrel, perfectly preserved from around 30,000 years before. At first, this lump of fur, claws, and limbs didn't look like much, but scientists examined it more and realized that they'd found an Arctic ground squirrel that had died during hibernation. Researchers nicknamed the squirrel Hester after the area where it was discovered, and it's amazing to think that this little guy was running around the Yukon several thousand years ago, said museum representatives. When the mummified squirrel was first found, its exact identity wasn't clear until the team noticed little hands, claws, and a tail. Grant Zazula, a paleontologist from the Yukon government, was part of the team that studied the squirrel, saying, "It's not quite recognizable until you see those little hands and these claws, and you see a little tail, and then you see ears." The team figured that Hester was likely hibernating when it died. Arctic ground squirrels curl up into balls like this one when they hibernate in underground dens, often lined with nests made of leaves. These nests are usually found empty, so finding one with an actual squirrel inside was pretty cool. To avoid damaging the specimen, they decided not to unravel the ball of fur. Instead, they had it x-rayed by a local veterinarian who'd expected the bones to be in pretty bad condition, but when the x-ray results came in, the squirrel's skeleton was actually in great condition, and it looked nearly identical to a modern Arctic ground squirrel. In 2021, scientists discovered a tiny microscopic creature that had been frozen in Siberian permafrost for over 24,000 years. The team found it buried 11.5 feet deep. The little animal was what's called a belloid rotifer, and despite being frozen solid for thousands of years, it actually came back to life, and on top of that, it was still able to reproduce. Rotifers are tough little creatures. They typically live in freshwater or moist soil and are known for surviving in extreme conditions like radiation, dehydration, low oxygen, and freezing temperatures. To confirm its age, scientists radiocarbon dated the soil surrounding the critter. Stas Malaven, a co-author of the study, couldn't believe it, saying, "We revived animals that saw woolly mammoths," which is quite impressive. I agree. Next on the list we have Sanek. In 2021, there was a pretty amazing discovery in Greenland, a new dinosaur. New in that we didn't know it existed, not a living dinosaur, sadly. Researchers identified a previously unknown dinosaur species based on well-preserved skulls. This newfound species was named Isi Sanek, meaning cold bone in Greenlandic Inuit. The remains of this creature date back to the late Triassic period, about 214 million years ago. The skulls were first found in 1994, and at the time they were believed to belong to a Plateosaurus, but recent advancements in research techniques, including micro-CT scans, showed that these skulls actually belonged to a different dino altogether, a dinosaur that was different from any known species. To visualize the full form of the skulls, researchers used digital modeling after the micro-CT scans. These were bipedal herbivores, medium-sized, and shared a lot of similarities with sauropods. Those are those long-necked, giraffe-looking dinosaurs you probably remember from Jurassic Park. But the Isi Sanek would have been a lot smaller than them. They're pretty cool-looking dinosaurs, almost like a sauropod mixed with a velociraptor. at least to me. In 2016, scientists discovered a 12,400-year-old mummified puppy. This puppy was discovered in the permafrost along a river in Siberia. Researchers believe the puppy died in a landslide and its body became preserved in the ice. Its fur was intact, and the body, from its nose to its tail, was almost completely preserved. The only part that wasn't in perfect condition was the brain, which had started to decompose, but even still, about 70 to 80% of the brain was still intact. This puppy is one of the few animals in the Pleistocene era which has a well-preserved brain. While there have been other dog fossils found from the same time period, they were too decomposed to study. The puppy's condition is especially special because its brain could help researchers learn more about ancient animals. In fact, they were saying at the time that they could potentially use the DNA and tissues from this puppy to bring it back to life, which would have been nuts. Along with the frozen puppy, human tools were found near the site, meaning that this dog was domesticated and owned by people. In March of 2011, Sean Funk, a shovel operator at a mine in Fort McMurray, Alberta, was digging when he made an amazing discovery. A discovery that turned out to be Alberta's oldest dinosaur fossil and one of the best preserved ever found in the entire world. Honestly, this has to be the most amazing dinosaur discovery that I've ever read about. And I think Don Henderson, curator of dinosaurs at the Royal Tyrrell Museum, agrees, saying at the time, "Right away we knew it was going to be something good, but we had no idea how good it was going to be." So after getting the fossil back to the museum, Don and his team got to work, and 6 years later the dinosaur was named Boreal Pelta markmicelli. The name Boreal Pelta means shield of the north, and the species name honors Mark Mitchell, the museum technician who spent over 7,000 grueling hours removing the dinosaur from rock. Now, I'm not done with this one. There's just too much to talk about with this discovery to cram it into one point. So as I said, the Boreal Pelta was incredibly well preserved. It was covered in thick armor, especially around its neck. It also had these massive 20-inch spikes at the shoulders that were assumed to be for fighting, but Victoria Arbour, a curator of paleontology, also thought they might have been a display of health and strength, similar to the horns of a bull or tusks of an elephant. Now here's what's utterly crazy to me though. This dinosaur was so intact, they were able to see what was in its stomach. There were twigs and ferns in there, suggesting it ate during the wet season. Scientists think it could have been swept away by a flash flood, eventually sinking to the bottom of the sea. The body would have flipped over and sank, with its thick back and bloated belly causing it to be preserved in sediment, creating a natural time capsule that kept it safe for 110 million years. Here's another crazy thing about this find though. They were even able to determine, to a certain degree, what color the creature was. Most of the fossil was covered in relatively well preserved skin, and from this they were able to study pigment cells called melanosomes. Melanosomes are seen in nature all the time. It's what gives many modern day animals unique markings like spots and stripes. It's rare to see melanosomes in fossils, but again, Boreal Pelta was especially well preserved. At least one component of Boreal Pelta's color was this reddish brown, said Caleb Brown from the Royal Tyrrell Museum. The color on its back may have been part of a camouflage pattern called countershading, helping it blend into its environment and avoid predators. Now also in 2011, a team of paleontologists led by William Hammer discovered a new species of ancient dinosaur in the frozen mountains of Antarctica, an area that's usually thought of as one of the coldest places on Earth, but of course millions of years ago it was much warmer. The dinosaur was small, around 4 to 5 feet long, and had bird-like hip bones. It was likely related to early plant eaters like the Ferbosaur and Heterodontosaur, which were the ancestors of larger and more famous dinos like Stegosaurus and Ankylosaurus. The fossils were found on Mount Kirkpatrick, part of the Central Transatlantic Mountains. Hammer and his team uncovered a leg and foot, but they weren't sure if they had found the dinosaur's head. It would take about a year to fully understand what they'd found. Thomas Holtz, a geology professor at the University of Maryland, noted that the find could help fill gaps in both dinosaur evolution and the ancient Antarctic environment, saying that this discovery was from a time when dinosaurs were just starting to take over, comparing these early small plant eaters to rabbits, fast, common, and without armor, but important to the overall evolution of the giant plant eaters that came later. Finding fossils in Antarctica is extremely challenging because of the harsh conditions and short research window. Hammer had been trying to return to the site since 1990, but bad weather and helicopter problems cut short his 2003 trip. As Holtz put it, anytime we find fossils there, it's a brand new species. It's practically unexplored territory. So these weren't the only dino remains William Hammer discovered in the mountains of Antarctica. In 1990, he and his team discovered a 22-foot meat-eating dinosaur called Cryolophosaurus. This was a big deal because it was the first dinosaur ever found in Antarctica. Cryolophosaurus was a meat-eating dinosaur that lived around 190 million years ago during the early Jurassic period. It was about 20 to 23 feet long, 6 to 7 meters, and weighed roughly 1,000 pounds. What really sets this dinosaur apart was its unique crest. The crest, found on the top of its head, had a very unusual shape, kind of like a frozen backwards mohawk. There are like two kind of things here. It's believed that the crest could have been used for display, either to attract mates or to communicate with other members of its species. As Hammer put it, it looked like a frozen crested reptile, which is how they got the name Cryolophosaurus, meaning frozen crested lizard. And again in the early 1990s, William Hammer of Augustana College discovered more incredible fossils on Mount Kirkpatrick. These particular fossils included parts of a foot, leg, and ankle bones from a long-necked dinosaur that lived around 190 million years ago. It wasn't until much later, though, that the fossil was identified. The fossils were painstakingly removed from the ice and rock using jackhammers, rock saws, and chisels under extremely difficult conditions, said Nathan Smith, a graduate student at the Field Museum in Chicago. After a lot of hard work, Smith and paleontologist Diego Pohl realized they'd found a new species of dinosaur, which they named Glacialosaurus hammeri. This dinosaur was about 20 to 25 feet long and would have weighed between 4 to 6 tons. It belonged to a group called sauropodomorphs, which includes some of the largest dinosaurs ever. Think of those massive-sized, long-necked plant eaters. Around 20,000 years ago, a young woolly rhinoceros was going about its day in what's now northern Siberia. It was probably foraging for food when it made an oopsie and drowned in a river. Fast forward to 2020, and that same woolly rhino became a huge discovery for scientists. As rising temperatures cause permafrost to melt, creatures like this long extinct rhino are being uncovered, giving researchers a glimpse into prehistoric times. Permafrost is a layer of soil that's been frozen for thousands of years, great for preserving ancient remains. The woolly rhino's carcass was found by a local farmer in Yakutia, Siberia, about 15,000 years after the species went extinct. The fossil was incredibly well preserved, with its fur, hooves, and internal organs still intact. But what made this discovery even more special was the rhino's horn, which is rarely found in such good condition because cartilage usually decomposes relatively quickly. In 2018, a local man named Pavel Efimov made an incredible discovery in Siberia: the severed head of a giant wolf, perfectly preserved beneath the permafrost. But this wolf was nearly 40,000 years old. It wasn't until 2019 that researchers started studying it in detail. The big question they were trying to answer was whether the wolf's head had been chopped off by humans or separated by ice. The cut on the wolf's neck wasn't what you'd expect from ice separation. It was rougher, less smooth, meaning it might have been made by something like a tool. The severed head is quite large, measuring about 40 centimeters, much bigger than the typical 25-centimeter head of a modern Siberian wolf. It had a thick mammoth-like coat, sharp fangs, and some parts of its skull seemed more developed than today's wolves. In 2016, ornithologist Stephen Emsley made a surprising find during a research trip in Antarctica. He stumbled on ancient penguin remains at Cape Urzar near the Ross Sea, and what he discovered there was unlike anything he'd seen before. Now, at first, Emsley was researching ancient penguin remains at the site, following a lead about penguin droppings. He didn't expect to find much, since explorers like Robert Falcon Scott and Ernest Shackleton hadn't recorded any penguin sightings in the area. But when Emsley arrived, he found something unexpected: white splotchy guano stains and loose chick bones, which usually indicate that a penguin colony had recently occupied the site, but that wasn't the case. Investigating further, he found complete penguin chick carcasses and even intact mummies. The site must have been covered by snow and ice soon after the colony was last abandoned, preserving the surface remains for centuries, Emsley went on to write. The site had been used by penguins at different times in the past, with carbon dating showing it was occupied 3 times starting around 5,000 years ago. The site's location and the penguins' repeated visits were likely because of changing ice conditions, which would open and close the coast to the penguins. Emsley believes that this area could potentially see penguins returning in the future as climate change melts the sea ice earlier each summer, giving them access to the coast again. In 2018, some fossil ivory hunters in northeastern Siberia made a pretty cool discovery. While digging into the permafrost, they unearthed the carcass of a bird, but this bird was a 46,000-year-old specimen, perfectly frozen in time. The discovery was sent to paleontologist Love Dallin and a team of researchers at the Swedish Museum of Natural History. The bird is believed to be an ancestor of the horned lark, which is found in places like northern Russia and Mongolia today. It's a cool find though, the first bird of its kind ever to be discovered. The fact that the bird was almost completely intact made it one of the best preserved ancient animals ever found. The bird was found near Belaya Gora, a village in Yakutia, an area known as the Pole of Cold because of its extremely cold winters, sometimes reaching as low as -60 degrees Fahrenheit, which is roughly -50 degrees Celsius. That is just too cold. The researchers think that the end of the last ice age led to the formation of a new subspecies of animals like this bird. The discovery adds to a list of well-preserved creatures found in the same area, like a 42,000-year-old foal and an 18,000-year-old puppy, both of which I've talked about in previous videos. In 2007 and 2008, 2 baby mammoths, later named Lyuba and Chroma, were found in Siberia. They were so well preserved that researchers were able to piece together how they died, even though both calves, one about 1 month old and the other 2 months old, died more than 40,000 years ago. Scientists used CT scans to find that the 2 mammoths probably choked on mud after falling into water. Daniel Fisher, a co-author of the study, stated the mud was like a really thick batter that they got clogged in their trachea and they were unable to dislodge by coughing. Basically preserved them from taking another breath. Lyuba and the 1-month-old calf was discovered by a reindeer herder. Chroma was found in 2008, frozen upright in permafrost. Scavengers had eaten parts of her heart, lungs, and skull. But both mummies still showed a neonatal line on their teeth, a marker of stress during birth, which helped scientists estimate their ages. CT scans of Lyuba showed signs of what's called a mammalian dive reflex, showing that she fell through the ice into a muddy lake where she tried to clear the mud from her airways but eventually suffocated. Chroma, who had a belly full of breast milk, also had mud in her trachea, but her death is a bit less cut and dry. But according to researchers, it's possible she fell into a river, broke her back, and was then buried in mud while trying to escape. In 2015, scientists in Siberia discovered a baby woolly rhino, perfectly preserved in a frozen riverbank. Nicknamed Sasha after the man who found it, the rhino calf is the most complete specimen of its kind ever discovered. Sasha lived around 10,000 years ago, was about 1.5 meters long, or almost 5 feet, and 0.8 meters high, about 2.6 feet, much smaller than the fully grown adults, which could reach up to 15 feet long. According to Albert Protopopov from the Yakutian Academy of Sciences, baby woolly rhinos are incredibly rare to find, so this was a pretty amazing discovery, especially because it helps researchers learn more about the early life of these animals, which they didn't really know much about before. Woolly rhinos went extinct around 10,000 years ago. Climate change and habitat loss likely led to their extinction, but some scientists also think overhunting may have been a part of it. Around 30,000 years ago in Siberia, a tiny cave lion cub was making its way across the tundra when a sudden mudslide or crack in the permafrost caused the cub to fall and get trapped. The cub was buried in ice, preserving her fur, skin, and organs in almost perfect condition. This poor cub, later named Sparta, was discovered by mammoth tusk hunters in 2017, poking out of the melting permafrost in Yakutia, Siberia. Sparta is probably the best preserved Ice Age animal ever found, said Love Dallin, one of the study's co-authors, going on to say that even her whiskers were preserved. Sparta died about 28,000 years ago, and she was actually found alongside another cub named Boris, who was even older, dying around 43,000 years ago. Both cubs were about 1 to 2 months old when they died, with their sharp teeth just starting to emerge. Cave lions were closely related to modern African lions and lived across the northern hemisphere during the Ice Age. Unlike today's lions though, these were of course adapted to freezing cold weather. In 2020, a perfectly preserved bear mummy was discovered in the Siberian permafrost. Siberia again. But anyway, it wasn't quite what scientists expected. At first, researchers thought they'd found the remains of a giant extinct cave bear, but eventually they realized the bear was much younger and from a completely different species. The bear was found by reindeer herders on a remote island in the East Siberian Sea. It was so well preserved that scientists could still see its skin, fur, claws, teeth, nose, internal organs, and even body fat. The remains were named the Antarctic bear after a nearby river. At first, researchers at the Lazarev Mammoth Museum believed the bear was a cave bear, a massive species that went extinct about 22,000 years ago, but this bear was only about 3,460 years old. Turned out to be a young female brown bear standing just over 5 feet tall and weighing around 172 pounds. It was probably around 2 to 3 years old when it died. The bear's stomach contents revealed it had been eating plants and birds, with feathers still found inside its belly, which is incredible when you think about it. It also had signs of spinal injuries, which may have contributed to its death. In 2016, a gold miner in Yukon, Canada discovered something frozen in the ice. It turned out to be an ancient wolf pup, which had been almost perfectly preserved for 57,000 years. The mummified gray wolf, known as Zur, was found in the Klondike goldfields near Dawson City. Lead researcher Julie Machin, an anatomy professor, called it, quote, the most complete wolf specimen ever found from the Ice Age, going on to say all her soft tissue, her hair, her skin, even her little nose is still there. She's just complete, and that is really rare. Using radiocarbon dating and DNA analysis, scientists confirmed Zur died at just 7 weeks old. The remains were especially important because they were discovered in North America, unlike most finds in Siberia, as you've seen from this list, which are harder to access. Machen and her team were able to link Zur's DNA to both ancient Beringian wolves from Yukon and Russian gray wolves, which means that ancient wolves from North America and Eurasia mixed. Zur's remains also showed them what Ice Age wolves ate. The assumption had always been that they mostly ate bison or oxen, but as it turned out, this wolf mostly consumed aquatic animals, much like modern wolves in Alaska. In 2011, members of a tribe in northern Siberia found the remains of a steppe bison, perfectly preserved after being frozen for nearly 10,000 years. The bison was transported to the Eurasian Academy of Sciences, where scientists began to study it. Unlike other bison mummies discovered over the years, this one was almost entirely intact, with its internal organs in remarkable condition. Olga Potapova, collections curator at the Mammoth site of Hot Springs, explained that while bison mummies are not uncommon, they're usually incomplete, saying, quote, normally what you find with mummies of megafauna is partial carcasses, but this mummy was preserved so well that it earned a record for the level of its preservation. The bison, which was probably about 4 years old when it died, looked like it had starved to death. There was no fat around its abdomen, but its heart and digestive systems were pretty intact, even though some organs had shrunk over time. Researchers even managed to extract tissue samples from each organ, and for the first time ever, they found steppe bison brain tissue still preserved. In 2022, a nearly perfectly mummified baby woolly mammoth was discovered by a miner in the permafrost of Canada's Klondike goldfields, dating back around 30,000 years. The calf, thought to be around 1 month old when it died, was a female and measured just 4.5 feet long. Researchers described it as the most complete mummified mammoth found in North America. A lot of its skin and hair was still intact. As an Ice Age paleontologist, it had been one of my lifelong dreams to come face to face with a real woolly mammoth, said Grant Zazula, a paleontologist with the Yukon government, going on to describe the mammoth as, quote, one of the most incredible mummified Ice Age animals ever discovered in the world. The discovery happened when a mine worker hit something unexpected while digging. The team stopped all their work and brought in geologists who managed to recover the mammoth's remains, and just in time because a storm had been rolling in. Analysis suggested that the mammoth may have died after getting trapped in mud while grazing, with grass, found in her stomach. In 2018, yet another incredible discovery was made in Siberia. The nearly perfectly preserved mummified remains of an Ice Age horse, believed to have died between 30,000 and 40,000 years ago. Its body was so well preserved that even tiny details like the hairs in its nostrils and around its hooves were still visible. The foal was found deep in a crater, about 328 feet or 100 meters deep, during an expedition in Yakutia. It was around 2 months old when it died. The mummified body was almost entirely intact, with no visible damage. Scientists collected samples from the foal's hair and tissue and found it belonged to an extinct species known as the Lena horse, which was genetically distinct from the wild horses that still roam the area today. This species lived in Siberia tens of thousands of years ago and disappeared long before modern horses evolved. In 2016, biologist Steve Emsley was in southern Antarctica when he came across something kind of confusing. It looked to be a recently abandoned Adelie penguin colony. There were mummified chicks, guano stains, pebbles from nests, but the thing is, Adelie penguins hadn't been spotted in the region for centuries. What Emsley soon discovered was that the penguin remains were far older than anyone could have imagined. Radiocarbon dating of the bones, eggshells, and mummified skin showed that these penguins had been dead for thousands of years. The rapidly melting ice in Antarctica revealed these ancient penguin remains. The penguins had likely settled in the area during warmer periods when the sea ice melted early, allowing the birds to reach the area and build their nests. The most recent colony, which had been buried during the Little Ice Age about 800 years ago, was finally uncovered as the region's ice began to recede. What you're looking at here is a tardigrade, aka a water bear. Now, is this a newly discovered alien species? Well, I wish, but no, these things actually exist right here at home. They're just really, really tiny, which I'm thankful for, because imagine if that alien-looking thing was the size of just even a regular house cat. That would just be horrifying. Tardigrades, nicknamed water bears, are one of the most resilient animals on the planet. They're microscopic animals that are known for their ability to survive in very extreme conditions all over the world. In places like Antarctica, they've been found frozen in ice for thousands of years. And what's amazing about these things is their ability to go into a kind of state of suspended animation. When conditions are harsh, like extreme cold or dryness, tardigrades dry out or freeze and enter a kind of hibernation. And when researchers thaw them out, they can come back to life. Water bears have even survived space travel in this dormant state. This makes them one of the toughest known organisms in the world.
Up first is the cracked cap. A massive piece of Greenland's ice cap just broke off from the ice sheet, and researchers are seriously concerned. The glacier is some 110 square kilometers in size, making it one of the most significant single losses of ice mass in Arctic history. To scientists, ecologists, and people who care about having an environment to live in, this is often considered pretty bad. But nations around the world and the corporations within them are seeing nothing but dollar signs. See, unlike the Antarctic, the Arctic is not a single impassable continent. It's an ice cap stretching down over several archipelagos and land masses. For centuries, the Arctic has been nigh on impassable, as the ice is simply too thick and dangerous. But as the ice melts and the equator becomes unbearably hot, this ice will open up all sorts of new passageways through the Arctic. Claims over Arctic waterways are already being heavily sought as America, Russia, Canada, Norway, Denmark, and Finland jockey for position over who gets to control these potentially highly profitable trade routes. Next is the oldest DNA. A group of Danish researchers in Greenland made an incredible discovery, finding the oldest DNA ever. This fleck of genetic material was determined to be 2 million years old. That outstrips the previously oldest known DNA by 1 million years. The known history of life stretches back hundreds of millions of years, but only fossils, no DNA, can be recovered from that far back. This isn't just some shred of DNA either, but an actual readable genetic code, giving unparalleled insight into ancient biology. The researchers went into an area of Greenland where they were surrounded by 2 million million-year-old mounds of dirt, and then began taking core samples. There were no fossils or remnants of bone, but by testing the soil, they were able to identify some actual strands of DNA. The special factor in Greenland, which allows DNA to survive for so long, are both the cold and minerals in the soil, which actually bind to the DNA and help to preserve it within the soil. It's unknown exactly where this DNA came from, but likely from one of any number of sources, as living creatures are shedding DNA constantly. Some of this, likely from excrement, was preserved inside the soil for 2 million years to eventually be discovered by these Danish researchers. Next is the microcontinent. It's estimated only 5% of the ocean has been observed, but that number is rapidly growing as scientists continue mapping the seafloor and making new discoveries. For instance, it was just recently discovered that there is in fact a microcontinent between Greenland and Canada, as a result of Greenland and Canada splitting apart, leading to the formation of the Davis Strait. This microcontinent began to be formed from the left-behind tectonic plate, now known as the Davis Strait microcontinent. This seems to indicate that tectonic plates are not solid masses, but can in fact fuse, split, and calve to form entirely new continents. Now, this isn't quite a full continent, in fact it's still a proto-microcontinent, but in another few million years this could very well become its own independent tectonic plate, influencing our world in as of yet unknown ways. Now, we won't be around to see it, and the formation has already been ongoing for 30 to 60 million years, but it is fascinating to understand that the world around us is continuing to change, that there is no end of history, and even if we're all gone, the fascinating tectonic movements of plates will continue on the Earth's crust. Next are new Greenland bears. Researchers were tasked with conducting a census and analysis of the polar bear population of Greenland, a population that is increasingly under threat. They would discover something totally different from their expectations though. Instead of the assumed single amorphous population covering the entire eastern coastline, it actually turns out there are two distinct and discrete polar bear populations in Greenland. The northeastern population has always been the most studied and most observed, as they're closest to human settlements, and it was assumed that they were emblematic of bears everywhere on the landmass, but this is not so. There's a southeastern population of bears that live among the mountainous and dangerous fjords in the south. This area is highly remote and heavily isolated, with no human habitation existing in the area, which of course made investigation and research quite difficult, but not impossible. So researchers spent several months tracking and even tagging polar bears in this harsh environment. Shockingly, there were quite high densities of polar bears in the fjords, something which truly surprised the researchers, as they did not expect such a healthy and robust population. After years of study, it was eventually observed that these bears hunted differently than the others, and almost never actually went out onto the sea ice, the traditional hunting ground of polar bears. This is because their sea ice is simply so fragmented and dangerous that it's no longer a viable environment for them to hunt within. These bears are a distinct population and likely haven't genetically mingled with the northern population for well over 200 years. Given enough time, these bears could well become their very own species. Next is the ice melange. Ice melt is a concerning trend in the world's climate, as melting ice raises sea levels and releases even more CO2, worsening the greenhouse effect and impacting ocean currents as well as coastlines and ecosystems throughout the world. But scientists just discovered a rather concerning addition to the threat. It turns out significantly more Arctic ice sheet, especially around Greenland, has melted than we thought. In fact, it's shed about a fifth more of its ice mass in the last 4 decades than scientists thought it had. This is seriously concerning, as it seems to indicate the issue is already significantly worse than we had believed, and we believed it to be near catastrophic already. Many are saying the Arctic ice sheet is now beyond saving, and the best we can hope for is to mitigate the potential devastation and hold on for the ride. Of 207 glaciers studied in the report, 179 of them experienced a significant reduction in size since 1985. Most of of this ice loss actually comes from below the water level, where it's harder to track and where warm water currents can carve up the glacier. The rate of glacier calving from the ice sheet has also increased significantly. And finally is an ancient tundra. Researchers spent weeks making their way to a buried mountain, then proceeded to carve through 2 miles of ice sheet before getting down to the dirt below. Once they got there, they were stunned to discover several fascinating fossils from a bygone age where the ice sheet around Greenland had actually melted and exposed the soil beneath, leading to a flourishing tundra ecosystem. But as the ancient ice melted, it also raised the sea level, meaning only the tallest points of Greenland were left above water, making it almost a sort of archipelago. They found some fossilized mosses and other fungi, as well as Arctic willow, but even more interestingly, they discovered an insect's leg and a compound eye, giving an excellent view into the small creatures in the ancient Greenland landmass. However, this has raised a lot of fears that a similar melting of the ice could lead to the same ecosystem. Now, to be fair, in 2,000 years, the ecosystem would recover and diversify beautifully, but that doesn't really make the people living along the coastline feel any better about losing their home.
What you're looking at here is a water bear. Which Star Wars movie is it from? Well, none. These things actually exist right here at home. They're just really, really tiny, thankfully, because that thing looks like something from David Lynch's Dune. Wouldn't want to live in a world where this thing was as big as even a regular-sized house cat. Tardigrades, nicknamed water bears, are resilient, rather fascinating little creatures. They're microscopic animals that are known for their ability to survive in pretty extreme conditions. In Antarctica, tardigrades have been found frozen in ice for thousands of years. What's amazing about these little creatures is their ability to go into a state of suspended animation. When conditions are harsh, like extreme cold or dryness even, tardigrades dry out and enter a kind of hibernation. When researchers thaw them out, they can come back to life. Water bears have even survived space travel in this dormant state, making them one of the toughest known organisms. Their ability to withstand freezing, radiation, even the vacuum of space just goes to show that these little things may be the hardiest little critters on the face of the planet. Back in 2015, Siberian herders made a pretty crazy discovery. While looking for mammoth ivory in the frozen tundra, they found a 12,400-year-old puppy frozen in the permafrost. It was incredibly well preserved. The puppy's fur, whiskers, even its little nose was still intact, which is pretty unheard of for animals that have been frozen for, tens of thousands of years. The craziest part is its brain. Most ancient animals that get frozen, especially ones that old, end up with their brains completely degraded. This puppy, though, had a brain that was almost entirely undamaged. Crazy. So, scientists think this thing could have been a link between ancient wolves and the first domesticated dogs, which is also huge. The preservation of this puppy could help us solve one of the biggest mysteries in human history. How did humans first tame wolves and turn them into dogs? By extracting its DNA, researchers could unlock a lot of answers, giving us a better idea of when and how dogs became the adorable pets that we know and love today. In 2011, a team of researchers in Siberia made an absolutely amazing find. It was a bison that had been frozen for over 9,000 years. They didn't just find bones, though. The thing was preserved like it had just died the day before. The bison was covered in thick fur, it still had some muscle tissue, and even some of its internal organs, including its heart, they were almost perfectly preserved. And that level of preservation is rare for something this old, even when frozen. And this is absolutely nuts, kind of gross. So to make things even more surreal, scientists actually cooked and ate a piece of the meat. They were curious to see what 9,000-year-old bison tasted like. Turns out the answer is not much. Apparently it was chewy, didn't really taste like a lot, because that's what happens when your meat's been sitting in the freezer for 9,000 years. I would not have tasted that, I don't think. I don't care how many scientists are around telling me it's safe. I just don't really see the point. You guys go ahead. In 2018, Russian researchers found a horsefowl in Siberia that had been frozen in permafrost for over 42,000 years. What's so mind-blowing about this find isn't just how old it was how it was preserved. The foal still had its hooves, its fur, even its internal organs. But what really sent scientists into a frenzy was the fact that its BLOOD was still inside its body. Bodily fluids from a horse that lived during the Ice Age, preserved for tens of thousands of years. Well, because there was so much of the animal still there, the discovery kinda got people talking about cloning. And it wasn't just a passing thought. Scientists started to seriously discuss whether this young horse could be the key to bringing extinct species back to life. I mean, imagine seeing a horse from the Ice Age galloping around again, just like something out of Jurassic Park. I mean, not as cool, because it would be a horse instead of a dinosaur, but still an ancient horse. It's something, at least. In 2021, the scientists discovered a frozen mammoth in Siberia, and this one was unlike anything they'd seen before. Most frozen mammoths are found as skeletons, or with only small traces of flesh, but this one had actual chunks of flesh hanging from its bones. I mean, look at this thing, it almost looks like just a modern elephant. And again, it also had red stuff still in its body. Find helped scientists study how certain biological materials can survive freezing temperatures for such a long time. Researchers were able to collect samples of the BLOOD to analyze how it managed to stay in liquid form for so long, which could have massive implications for modern medicine. If scientists can figure out how mammoth BLOOD survived in permafrost, it could lead to breakthroughs in preserving organs for transplants, say. In 2022, scientists revived a virus that had been frozen for nearly 50,000 years. A virus called Pandoravirus yedoma was discovered in the Siberian permafrost. Fortunately, it only infects single-celled organisms, but the fact that something can survive being frozen for thousands and thousands of years and still be infectious, that opens up a lot of questions and concerns. For one, if a virus can stay in a state of suspended animation for that long and come back to life, what other dormant viruses or pathogens could be lurking in the melting permafrost? Scientists are especially concerned because climate change is causing permafrost to thaw at a pretty alarming rate, meaning more ancient viruses and bacteria could be released into the world. There could be viruses from the Ice Age that might be deadly to humans. You know, us modern folk just wouldn't have the immunity to them. Kimberly Miner, a climate scientist at the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, had this to say: "There's a lot going on with the permafrost that is of concern, and it really shows why it's super important that we keep as much of the permafrost frozen as possible." End quote. Now, to some, an old virus trapped in ice suddenly springing back to life and spreading across the world sounds like a zombie movie plot, and sure, the chances of things getting that bad are slim, but these frozen viruses are actually sometimes referred to as zombie viruses, and scientists have discovered some pretty unsettling things in the permafrost over the years. For example, in 1997, a lung sample from a woman buried in permafrost in Alaska was found to contain genetic material from the 1918 flu epidemic. Then in 2012, researchers confirmed that a 300-year-old mummy from Siberia had the genetic signatures of the smallpox virus, and just in 2016, there was a small anthrax outbreak in Siberia, which affected a small group of people and thousands of reindeer. This was also thanks to thawing permafrost. On a lighter note though, let's briefly talk about nematodes, also known as roundworms. This is another type of microscopic thing that can survive through freezing temperatures. In Antarctica, researchers have discovered these tiny worms frozen in the ice. Like tardigrades, nematodes can enter a state of suspended animation when conditions become too hard, and when they're thawed, they can sometimes revive and resume their normal activities. Not sure what nematodes get up to, probably not all that interesting, but still they can go back to doing whatever it is, which is pretty cool. It's also pretty cool is that scientists study these nematodes because their ability to survive might give us some clues about how to preserve other biological material and learn more about how life might survive in other extreme environments on Earth or even out in space. In 2020, researchers discovered the preserved remains of a woolly rhino on a Russian island. It still had some fur, its skin, and muscle tissue. What made it even more interesting is that the rhino was still a juvenile when it died, likely around 3 or 4 years old. Now, why is this so interesting? Well, because it was so young, only about 3 or 4, it helped researchers learn more about what growing up in the Ice Age was actually like, what they ate, how fast it grew, what kind of hellish environment it was dealing with, and how these things would have developed as they aged. In terms of how it died, it couldn't say for sure, but it looked like it probably drowned after falling through ice into freezing water. Instant deep freeze. This thing kind of looks like a brick too. It's like flat. Oh. Again, in 2020, scientists found a bird frozen so perfectly that it looked like it had just fallen out of the sky. It was a horned lark and had been dead for about 46,000 years. 46,000 years, and it looked like this. You know, still not like a great way for your body to be. Obviously the thing is dead, right? It doesn't look great. But if I were just looking at this image with no context, I would have thought it was dead for maybe 6 months. Not, 46,000 years. The bird was encased in ice, which preserved it in almost the same way it would have looked back in the Ice Age. Scientists took DNA samples to compare it to modern birds. The goal was to learn about how species evolved over tens of thousands of years, and possibly understand how the climate changes of that era might have influenced bird evolution. Also gave them a great look at how the Ice Age didn't just freeze mammals, it preserved all kinds of life forms. In 2019, reindeer herders in Siberia came across something pretty macabre, but also really cool. A severed bear head, frozen solid in the permafrost. But this was a very old bear, a Pleistocene cave bear, a giant of the Ice Age that could grow up to 11 feet tall and weigh over 3,000 pounds. The head was almost perfectly preserved with fur, teeth, and even the brain still inside. The cave bear has been extinct for about 24,000 years, but this head was so well preserved it almost looked like it had been frozen yesterday. And I know what you're thinking, but no, they did not find the body. How did just the head survive so perfectly, and where is the rest of it? Was it scavenged? That would be my guess. Hunters would have probably killed the thing and then ate the rest of its body.